I had never imagined I would one day find myself in such a moment. It wasn't only death itself that weighed upon me, but the storm of emotions it dragged back to the surface. There I sat, on a cold wooden pew, surrounded by the scent of withered flowers and burning candles, forcing myself to remain composed before everyone. Yet inside, I was in ruins. Cicero, the man with whom I had shared nearly a decade of my life, lay in silence inside that coffin. He was no longer the husband I once loved, nor the man who had so often let me down. He was only a still, pale body, encircled by wreaths of flowers. And yet, the sight of him pierced me. Every feature of his face carried echoes of a time when he had been my home, my family, my dream. But it also carried the memory of betrayal, the poison that had destroyed our household, the lies uncovered far too late. In the end, I had been forced to cast him out because love no longer lived there, only the remnants of broken promises. Still, before that coffin, my heart faltered. It was a whirlwind, sorrow, anger, resentment, and strangely enough, a trace of longing. I did not want him back, yet it hurt to know that the man with whom I had once shared my life was gone forever. What wounded me most, however, was not the memory of our quarrels, nor the abruptness of his death. What tore me apart in that moment was her presence. The other woman, the one who had silently taken my place for so long. There was Isabel, dressed in black, a scarf on her head, weeping as though she had lost the love of her life. She received embraces, words of comfort, sympathetic glances. Even friends who had once sat at my table bent toward her with compassion. Meanwhile, I, the true wife, the mother of his child, felt transparent, invisible. My God, what humiliation! I tried to hold my head high, but inside I burned with shame and indignation. Every tear she shed seemed to steal from me the right to mourn, as though, in an instant, I had become no more than a background figure in my own grief. If not for my daughter, I would have walked away. She clung to my arm, her eyes swollen from endless crying, unable to understand how her father could have left her so soon. I had to be strong for her. I had to endure, even though every moment in that chapel felt like walking barefoot over shattered glass. I lifted my gaze toward the altar. The yellow glow of the candles flickered, casting shadows on the whitewashed walls. The silence was broken only by muffled sobs and murmured prayers, and amid it all, a part of me cried out inwardly, "Why do I still miss him? Why does it hurt so much after everything he did to me?" Guilt consumed me. I should not miss him. I should not care. Yet death erases grievances in the cruelest of ways. For a fleeting instant, I forgot the mistress, the betrayals, the lies. I remembered only the devoted father who made my daughter laugh, the man who once looked at me as if I were his entire world. And so I sank deeper into this conflict, torn between the wounded woman who longed to turn her back and the widow who was bound to endure until the end. Each minute, there was a battle within me. At last, I felt I could bear no more. My throat tightened, my eyes stung. Quietly, I slipped from the chapel, desperate for air. The night was cold, the wind carrying the damp scent of rain that had fallen earlier. I drew a long breath, trying to still my heart. And it was then, when I believed myself utterly alone, that I heard a gentle voice behind me. "Good evening. My condolences." That voice marked the beginning of something I could never have foreseen. But until that moment, all I carried within me was pain, bitterness, and a loneliness so vast it scarcely fit inside me. The cold wind of that night seemed to cut straight through me. I tried to breathe deeply, as if the air itself might cleanse me of the pain and the weight pressing down on my chest. With every breath I took, I remembered that Cicero no longer breathed. There was no more sound of his voice, no footsteps echoing through the hallway at home. It was over. I closed my eyes for an instant, hoping for a fragment of peace, but all that came was his face. And in the background, the unbearable presence of the other woman. I wanted to scream, to run away, but my legs were anchored to the ground. And then I heard, "Good evening, my condolences." The voice startled me, for it was calm, steady, yet filled with respect. I opened my eyes and slowly turned. Before me stood a man I had never seen before. He didn't seem to be performing a mere gesture of courtesy. His dark eyes held mine with sincerity. That look, far from invasive, seemed to say, "I understand your pain." "My name is Alberto," he said, extending his hand gently. "I worked with Cicero." I hesitated for a moment, then took it. His hand was warm, steady, as though anchoring me in the present. "I'm very sorry for what happened," he went on. "It all came so suddenly." I didn't know what to say. I only nodded, murmuring a faint, "Thank you." For a few seconds, silence stretched between us. The wind stirred the trees near the chapel, and the emptiness seemed to enfold us both. Then he spoke again, and his words swept the ground from beneath me. "We talked about you often." My eyes widened. "About me?" I asked, trying to grasp his meaning. He sighed, as if weighing his words carefully. "Yes. In recent times, Cicero often spoke of regret. He admitted he had made mistakes, that he carried remorse for what he did to you. He never said it outright, but I always felt he wanted to come back." I froze. My heart thudded harder, as a mixture of anger and tenderness washed through me. Regret? Coming back? Why had he never told me this in life? Were these words the truth, or just a kindness meant to soften the grief of those left behind? I wanted to believe. And yet, the wound of betrayal pulsed within me. "That's news to me," I managed at last, keeping my voice steady. "He never came to me after leaving the house." "Perhaps he lacked the courage," Alberto said, his gaze holding mine with such intensity it unsettled my stomach. "But I know he regretted it." His words echoed inside me like a blow, gentle yet painful. A part of me wanted to reject it, to scream that it was too late, that none of it mattered anymore. But another part clung desperately to that thought, as though it were a final gift life was offering me. The belief that, despite everything, I had been loved. "Looking at you," he continued, hesitating, his voice almost a whisper, "I cannot fathom what was in Cicero's mind. How could he have traded you for her?" My cheeks burned. Not from the compliment itself, but from the unvarnished sincerity I heard in his voice. It wasn't vulgar, nor an untimely flirtation. It was simply an observation, born of genuine astonishment. And it stirred something in me. No matter how much I told myself this was not the time, no matter how much I reminded myself that I was still at the wake of the man who had once been my husband, something in that conversation made me breathe differently. For the first time that night, I felt I was not entirely alone. We stood there beneath the cold night sky, exchanging brief words, a few memories of Cicero, until a longer silence settled between us. But it was not uncomfortable. On the contrary, there was a strange familiarity in this man I barely knew. When at last we said goodbye and returned to the chapel, I realized something had shifted. I still wept for Cicero, still suffered the humiliation of watching his mistress display her theatrical grief. But there was a new spark inside me. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A glimmer whispering that perhaps, in the midst of death, something unexpected might be beginning. When I returned to the chapel, my eyes sought him almost without my realizing it. It was as if that encounter outside had opened a small crack in the heavy wall of grief, and through it a breath of fresh air seeped in. Alberto stood on the other side of the room, among Cicero's co-workers. He spoke quietly, but now and then he would lift his face and our eyes would meet. It wasn't intentional. at least not on my part. I wanted to keep my focus on the coffin, on the prayers, on my daughter clinging to me with eyes still red from crying. Yet all it took was a moment of distraction, and there he was again. There was something unsettling in that silent exchange. It wasn't the crude flirtation of obvious and untimely intentions. No, it was different. His gaze didn't undress me, didn't invade me. On the contrary, it felt like a shelter, as if it were saying, "I see your pain, and I see you." And that was what unsettled me most, because it had been so long since I had felt seen. Cicero had stopped looking at me long before his betrayal came to light. There was no admiration left, no tenderness. And suddenly, in the middle of a wake, a stranger returned to me something I thought I had lost forever, the right to be noticed. I tried to resist that feeling. "This isn't the time, Sandra," I kept repeating to myself like a prayer. "You're in mourning. The father of your child lies there in the coffin. This is not the time to think of anything else." But his eyes persisted, not in conquering, but simply in being present. And the more he looked at me, the harder it became to ignore his presence. I felt a mixture of guilt and relief. Guilt for allowing myself to notice a man at such an inappropriate moment. Relief because, for the first time since Cicero's death, someone seemed to understand the chaos inside me without needing words. Meanwhile, Isabel continued her performance. She wept loudly, accepted consoling embraces, received pitying looks as though she were the widow. I breathed deeply, trying not to explode. Each of her tears pierced me like a blade. Yet every time my eyes drifted toward Alberto, I found a kind of balance, an invisible anchor. At one point, I realized I was smiling faintly. Not out of happiness, but with the bitter irony of someone surprised by herself. "I'm smiling at my husband's wake," I thought, stunned. "What's wrong with me?" But the heart is not easily tamed. As the night stretched on and the vigil wore into the early hours, there were moments when I almost forgot where I was. Amid the prayers and the heavy silence of the room, there was that invisible thread connecting us. A gaze held for a few seconds longer than etiquette allowed, a slight nod of respect. Tiny gestures, but in that setting, they felt immense. And it wasn't just me who felt it. He too seemed unsettled. At times, he would avert his eyes quickly, as if reminded of where we were. At others, he would hold the gaze, as if acknowledging that some connections happen even in the most inappropriate places. I didn't know whether I was right or wrong to allow this small space inside me. I only knew that after so much time living surrounded by lies, that silent look felt like the most honest thing in the world. The night wore on, and the weight of fatigue mingled with the pain. My daughter fell asleep with her head in my lap, and I sat there stroking her hair, staring at Cicero's still body, and, from time to time, meeting Alberto's eyes again. It was in that ebb and flow of memories, hurts, and glances that I understood something profound. Life doesn't ask permission to surprise us. It doesn't wait for the right moment. Sometimes it places before us an unexpected mirror, someone who reflects back what we believed was lost. That night, amid tears, prayers, and silences, I felt, timidly, almost imperceptibly, that perhaps I wasn't meant to live only on losses. And for the first time in a long while, I sensed that something inside me still wanted to live. The wake ended at dawn when the coffin was taken to the cemetery. I followed each step of the procession as though I were outside myself. My body moved forward, but my soul felt trapped, confused, torn between relief and pain. I watched as Cicero was lowered into the cold earth, and in that instant, a part of me sealed shut forever. I felt the definitive weight of the word end. Though we had separated months before, though I had driven him from our home, Death is always a cruel cut. No explanations, no returns, no second chances. As everyone dispersed, Isabel lingered, receiving embraces of sympathy, as though she were the true widow. My heart burned with indignation, but I no longer had the strength to challenge anything. I held my daughter close and thought only of taking her home, shielding her from all that farce. It was then that Alberto approached. He had been there through it all, silent, discreet, respectful. He had helped carry the coffin with Cicero's colleagues, had walked steadily at my side without ever overstepping the line of propriety. And yet, his presence brought me a strange sense of support. "Sandra," he said, pulling a small card from his pocket. "Here's my number. If you need anything, at any time, you can call me." I took the card and slipped it into my purse without thinking much. There was something gentle in his voice, as though he were saying more than the words themselves. Perhaps it was only my loneliness, perhaps grief playing tricks on me, but I felt as though that simple gesture had woven an invisible thread between us. I was already preparing to thank him and say goodbye when he paused, drew a deep breath, and turned back to me. His eyes met mine with an intensity that made me shiver. "I know that. Given the circumstances, this isn't the ideal moment," he began, hesitant, almost apologizing for what he was about to say. "But would it be all right if I made you an invitation?" I frowned, surprised. An invitation? In the midst of all this mourning? "An invitation," I repeated, incredulous. He gave a faint, restrained smile, shy, almost, at odds with the steadiness of his gaze. "Yes, I'd like to invite you to lunch. You and your daughter, of course. It doesn't have to be formal, just a meal. There's a restaurant nearby. Afterwards, I'll drive you home." For a moment, the idea felt absurd. Too soon, far too inappropriate. I still felt Cicero's death like an open wound. I still carried the weight of humiliation at watching his mistress perform widowhood. What kind of woman would accept such an invitation, so quickly, so unexpectedly? But then I thought of all he had done that night. He had stayed near me with calm words, never once intruding. He had been present through the wake from start to finish. He had even helped carry Cicero's coffin as though the grief were his too. And now he was here, offering only a simple gesture, a lunch, a moment of breath. My heart faltered. On one side, guilt. "Sandra, you've just buried your daughter's father. How can you even consider this?" On the other, exhaustion. "You're so tired, so hurt. Don't you deserve a moment of lightness?" I looked at my daughter. Her eyes were still brimming with tears, her cheeks flushed from so much crying. Perhaps a lunch could help her too. Distract her, give her a brief reprieve from the pain. And so, in a low voice, almost ashamed, I answered, "All right." The light I saw in Alberto's eyes at that moment caught me off guard. He didn't overdo his joy, didn't make any untimely gesture. He simply nodded, in silence, like someone receiving a delicate gift. As we walked toward the car, I felt an invisible line cross between us that morning. It wasn't just a lunch. It was as though life, amid the chaos, had chosen to offer me an opening, an unexpected path toward something new. Inside me, the conflict remained. I still carried the weight of mourning, still felt betrayed, still burned with anger at the memory of the mistress. But there was also something else being born, timid, almost imperceptible. The sense that perhaps I wasn't condemned to live only on losses. And it all began with that unlikely invitation, made at the edge of an ending. Accepting that invitation had seemed, at first, a small gesture. But when I found myself sitting at the restaurant table, I realized it had been more than that. It was as if I had crossed an invisible border, leaving behind the suffocating silence of the chapel and stepping into a space where, For the first time in days, I could breathe. The restaurant was simple, nothing sophisticated. White tablecloths already a little worn, framed landscapes on the walls, and the strong smell of homemade food in the air. At that hour, there were only a few people inside, which brought me some relief. I feared judging eyes, the whispers of those who might recognize the recent widow sitting beside another man. Alberto, however, seemed at ease. He didn't speak loudly, didn't make exaggerated gestures. Everything about him was measured and careful, as though he knew exactly the weight of the situation. He didn't treat me like a woman available, nor like someone to be pursued. He treated me like a person in ruins who needed, above all, respect. My daughter sat beside me, her eyes still red, her face weary. She toyed with the napkin, untouched food before her, her expression far away. The grief consumed her in a way I couldn't soothe. "Do you like lasagna?" Alberto asked, his voice soft, almost playful, directed at her. She lifted her eyes, startled, unsure how to respond. "I do," she murmured, barely audible. "Then let's order one. I promise it's better than your mother's." I turned to him, indignant for a heartbeat. But his amused expression disarmed me. It was so light, so spontaneous, that I realized he wanted only to coax a smile out of her. And he succeeded. Small, timid, barely there. But it was a smile. I, who until then had seen only tears rolling down my daughter's face, felt my heart tighten in a different way. For the first time in that long night of farewells, I saw in her a trace of life, a spark of joy. The food arrived, and little by little the air grew less heavy. We spoke of simple things, work, old films, childhood memories. He shared funny stories from the office where he had worked with Cicero, never once crossing the line of respect. He spoke with ease, as someone in no hurry to prove who he was. I caught myself laughing at one of his stories. Not a loud laugh, but a short one, almost embarrassed, that escaped before I could stop it. And in that instant, a jolt went through me. "Sandra, you're laughing. You've just buried your daughter's father, and you're laughing." The guilt returned like a wave, pulling me back into reality. But along with it came relief, as though my own body had betrayed me on purpose, reminding me that I was still alive. I looked at Alberto and saw that he didn't revel in my laughter, didn't boast of causing it. He only smiled discreetly, as one who understands that some things need not be forced. "It was good," I said, almost in confession, stirring the food on my plate. "It was good to be here." He looked at me with eyes that didn't press, only embraced. "Sometimes," he said, "we need a break even from our own grief." His words struck deep. That was it. I needed a pause, not to forget Cicero, not to erase the wounds, but to remember that I still had a life to live, and a daughter who needed to see me whole. When lunch was over, he insisted on driving us home. On the way, in the back seat, my daughter rested her head against the window and fell asleep. I stayed silent, staring out at the passing streets, trying to arrange my thoughts. It was too soon, I knew. And yet something in me grew quiet in his presence. It wasn't passion. It wasn't immediate desire. It was just peace. A peace I hadn't felt in a long time. When he stopped in front of my gate, he turned off the car and looked at me. "Today I paid for lunch," he said. "But next time, it's your turn." I smiled without meaning to. And in that moment, I realized this smile was different. It wasn't ironic, nor ashamed, nor defensive. It was real, born from within, a timid promise that something new was beginning to take shape. That day, in the midst of mourning and shadows, I discovered that a simple gesture could open the door to hope, and it all began with a first smile. The days that followed were strange, as if I had crossed a border without realizing it. On the outside, routine looked the same. waking up early, making coffee, tending to the house, consoling my daughter through her silent tears. But inside, there was something new, almost forbidden, that followed me like a gentle shadow. The memory of Alberto. I tried to push that thought away, repeating to myself that it was wrong, too soon, that I had to be in mourning. Yet the more I tried, the more his image seeped into my silences. The way he looked at me in the chapel, the care in his voice when speaking to my daughter, the calm tone as if he held the power to dim the chaos living inside me. And then came the cruel question, was I truly ready to feel something new? Or was it only loneliness, the need to fill the void Cicero had left behind? I asked myself these questions night after night, lying in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, searching for answers that never came. That weekend, after much hesitation, I picked up the card he had given me at the funeral. I stared at the numbers for long minutes, heart racing. My hand trembled as I dialed. "Hello?" His voice came through, warm, surprised. "Hi, Alberto. It's Sandra." There was a short pause, followed by a relieved laugh. "Sandra, what a good surprise. I'll admit, I thought you wouldn't call." I smiled, even if he couldn't see it. "I'm calling to settle a debt. Do you remember? The lunch." "How could I forget?" he replied, playful. "So, when?" We set it for Sunday. The rest of the week I lived caught between anticipation and guilt. Every time I thought of him, my heart raced like a teenager's. But soon after, the stern voice of my conscience would remind me, "You are still mourning Cicero's death. What will people say? How can you allow yourself to feel this now?" On Sunday, as I waited, I felt like a girl about to live her very first date. I watched from the window, and when I saw his car pull up, my heart nearly stopped. But nothing prepared me for what came next. He stepped out, holding a bouquet of flowers, red roses. My hands grew damp. For an instant, I didn't know how to react. He walked up to me, extended the flowers, and said simply, "These are for you. I hope you like roses." And as if that weren't enough, he pulled a small box from his pocket and handed it to my daughter. "And this is for you. I didn't want to come empty-handed." I saw the sparkle in her eyes as she opened the gift. A simple gesture, but immense in care. And in that instant, something shifted inside me. We spent the day together. We had lunch, talked, laughed about trivial things. He carried a lightness that surprised me, a way of making even silence feel comfortable. And once again, I realized something that frightened me. I was happy. Yes, there was still pain, still memories that bled. But by his side, there was also the sense that I could begin again. As if life, even after taking so much, had chosen to offer me a small chance to be reborn. When he left in the late afternoon, I stood at the door, watching his car disappear down the street. I held the roses against my chest and let the tears finally fall. They weren't tears of pain, but of recognition. I knew what was happening to me. I was falling in love. And that, more than anything, scared me. Because my heart, wounded so many times, seemed unwilling to surrender. Yet my body, my soul, my gaze, already knew the truth I tried to deny. The discovery of this new feeling was not like a lightning bolt, but like a soft flame, growing slowly, almost unnoticed. I didn't want to admit it, but it was already too late. Alberto had become part of my thoughts, my days, my dreams, and for the first time since Cicero's death, I felt that the future might once again hold color. With every meeting with Alberto, something inside me shifted. It was as if a part of my soul, long asleep under the weight of betrayal and the shadow of death, was beginning to wake again. But with that awakening came fear, a crushing fear of giving in, of trusting once more, of allowing someone to hold power over my heart. I remembered Cicero. I remembered the day I uncovered his lies, the sleepless nights I cried alone, the silent humiliations I swallowed just to keep appearances. And now, facing this new man, so different yet so present, I asked myself, what if it's just another illusion? What if it all ends the same way again? It was on a Sunday afternoon that I realized this feeling could no longer be denied. Alberto arrived at my door holding a bouquet of red roses. When he extended them toward me, I felt it wasn't just a charming gesture, it was a symbol, a silent declaration. I brought these because I didn't want to come empty-handed. But really, they're just a detail, he said, smiling with a shyness that contrasted with his usual steady posture. I held the flowers against my chest, and tears welled in my eyes. He didn't flinch, didn't rush to console me with empty words. He simply stayed there, silent, letting me cry. And in that moment, I realized it was exactly what I needed. Someone who could hold space for me without demanding anything in return. We spent the day together. He cooked, played with my daughter, filled the house with a lightness I had almost forgotten could exist. With every gesture, I felt my defenses crumbling, one by one. The contrast was impossible to ignore. With Cicero, I had ceased to exist as a woman. With Alberto, I felt whole. By late afternoon, when the house was quiet and my daughter played in her room, he drew closer. He took my hands in his and looked into my eyes. There was such profound sincerity in his gaze that my heart raced. "Sandra," he began, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I know this might seem too soon, strange, maybe even wrong, but I can't help what I feel. Since that night at the funeral, something changed in me. When I look at you, I don't just see a woman in mourning. I see strength, beauty, life, and I want to be by your side, if you'll let me." My whole body trembled. His words fell over me like rain after a long drought. I wanted to respond, to say something, but no voice came. All I could do was cry. He squeezed my hands gently, patient, as if willing to wait for however long I needed. And that was when I understood. The battle was no longer against him, but against myself, against the fear of believing again. "I'm afraid, Alberto," I confessed through sobs. "I'm afraid of giving myself and being hurt again. It's hurt so much already. I don't know if I could survive another disappointment." He touched my face with a tenderness that warmed my heart. "I can't promise there will never be pain, Sandra. No one can. But I can promise never to deceive you. I can promise to be here, present, every single day." Those words pierced me to the core. They weren't fairy tale promises, not empty vows of eternal love. They were simple, real, human. And perhaps that was exactly what I needed to hear. That night, after he left, I sat alone in the living room, clutching the flowers he had brought. The soft fragrance of the roses filled the air, as though each petal carried a reminder that life can bloom even out of ruins. I understood then that the climax wasn't only in what he said or did, but in the battle raging within me. The weight of the past pulled me down, trying to chain me to pain, to resentment, to fear. But the pull of a new future tugged me forward, opening a path toward hope. And for the first time, I felt I might actually have the strength to choose hope. The days went by, and every moment with Alberto seemed to confirm what I already knew, yet still feared to admit. My heart was opening once again. At first, I tried to fool myself. I told myself it was only gratitude, that he had appeared at the right moment to soften the pain. Then I tried to believe it was nothing more than friendship, an unexpected companionship. But deep down, I knew. My body knew. My soul knew. Every look, every gesture, every word of his made me feel alive again. And it was in that contrast that I realized the magnitude of the transformation. It hurt to remember Cicero's betrayal, the silent humiliation I endured, the sudden death that stole from me any chance of reconciliation or a true goodbye. Yet at the same time, it was impossible to deny that, in the midst of all that darkness, life had gifted me with a new light. It was strange to think of it. I still cried, still had nightmares, still woke up in the middle of the night with his absence pressing on my chest. And yet, at Alberto's side, I could smile, as if the heart were capable of carrying grief and love at the same time. One evening, after a simple dinner at home, I sat with him on the porch. The silence was comfortable, broken only by the distant sound of crickets and the soft wind stirring the leaves of the trees. Sometimes I feel guilty, I confessed, staring at the starry sky, as if I didn't have the right to be happy now, as if I were betraying Cicero's memory. He looked at me for a few seconds, unhurried. Then he took my hand and spoke with his usual calm. "Grief is not a prison, Sandra. The love you lived with him was real, but it ended. Life doesn't end with death. You are still here. Your daughter needs you alive, whole, and you need to allow yourself to live." His words echoed inside me like a balm. For the first time, I felt it wasn't wrong, that there was no guilt in letting my heart be reborn. The days that followed only confirmed it. Alberto didn't push me, didn't demand more than I could give. He was simply present, sometimes with words, sometimes with silence, sometimes with small gestures that spoke louder than any declaration. A cup of coffee prepared early, a rose left on the table, a moment of play with my daughter. It was in one of those simple moments that I realized I had been reborn. It wasn't in a sweeping kiss, nor in a solemn promise. It was in the everyday, in the lightness he brought to my home, in the laughter returning to my daughter's face, in the hope blossoming inside me. One day, when I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw that I was no longer the same woman who had walked into that chapel carrying nothing but pain and resentment. The betrayed woman, the abandoned one, the widow. She had given way to someone new. A woman who had discovered that life can be harsh, unfair, cruel, but also capable of offering unexpected miracles. Alberto was my miracle. And even though everything had begun at such an improbable moment, in the funeral of the man who both hurt me and loved me, I knew there was nothing wrong in accepting that gift. Today, when I look back, I see that grief taught me something precious. Pain can bring me down, but love always lifts me up. Amid tears and wilted flowers, amid the uncomfortable presence of a mistress and the silence of the coffin, a new chance was born. A chance I would never have sought on my own, but that life handed to me. And so, from grief, love was born. Not the perfect love of fairy tales, but real love, the kind that arrives when we least expect it, that heals wounds with patience, that restores color to what once was gray. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if there will be more pain, more falls, new challenges. But I know that at his side, I have the courage to go on, because today, at last, I feel reborn. Thank you for following this story until the end. It has been an intense journey filled with emotions, loss, and new beginnings, and we hope each chapter touched you in some way. If you enjoyed this narrative, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories. Your support means a lot and helps us keep bringing more content like this. Also, feel free to share it with friends who love a good story. After all, every tale gains even more meaning when shared. See you in the next video.